Demons, present is the defendant, his counsel, and the assistant state attorney and jury. I understand is in the back. Is that right, Gary?
Yes, Judge.
We all set, ready to go, counsel?
What's your temperature?
Yes, sir.
What's your temperature?
Are there any objections on those
It's good.
photographs?
No objections.
I want the record to reflect that the temperature in here is 61.1 degrees, which is
Lovely.
for who? Eskimos?
I'll take that.
You might have to take somebody into custody here if they get too close.
Please. Please. And I will,
It's colder,
on
right?
a regular basis, inform the court of the temperature and the work conditions we're going through.
Work conditions, you're not employed by the state of Florida here, so it's not, you don't get any kind of workman's comp here yet.
Well, we'll discuss that at a later date.
All right, we're all set. Let's bring the jury in.
Travis, did we ever see your findings of the case?
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Please be seated. Let the record once again reflect the presence of the defendant, Mr. Demings, his counsel, the assistant state attorney, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you had a good evening and ready for the day. We're here again on the state's case in chief. So I think you completed the testimony of your last witness. Who's the next witness?
Christopher Williams.
Christopher Williams, please. You are Christopher Williams?
Yes, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
This is our witness stand. When you come on in, just remain standing for a bit. Raise your right hand to be sworn.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you should give in this case shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state your full legal name for the record.
Christopher Williams,
Please spell your first and last name for the record.
CHRISTOPHERWILLIAMS.
Thank you so much.
Please have a seat. Mr. Williams, that microphone in front of you will adjust up or down as you move back and forth. All right? Ready to proceed?
Yes, sir.
Counsel, you may.
Thank you. Good morning, Detective. How are you doing today?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
Very well. Thank you for asking. Could you please introduce yourself to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury and tell them where you work?
I am now Sergeant Christopher Williams. I work for the Broward County Sheriff's Office.
Congratulations on your promotion. My apologies, Sergeant.
Thank you.
So, Sergeant, could you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what your current assignment is with the Broward Sheriff's Office?
I'm currently a sergeant assigned to the Road Patrol Division in the Pompano Beach District.
And how long have you been there?
1 month.
In terms of prior to going and becoming a sergeant on that promotion, what did you do for the Sheriff's Office?
Previous to that, I worked in the crime scene unit of the Sheriff's Office for 11 years.
When you worked in the crime scene unit, were you a sworn law enforcement officer?
Yes.
What were some of your job responsibilities and tasks as a crime scene detective?
So crime scene detective for the Broward Sheriff's Office, most of us are all sworn. We have 12 sworn law enforcement officers in there, 3 civilians. We respond to major crime scenes, rape, murder, homicide, suicide, suspicious death, police-involved shootings, and robberies with a crime scene and a victim. We also respond to shootings that happen with a victim as well, and we investigate. Those are the only things that we investigate. Anything less would be investigated by road patrol deputy.
Okay, so Sergeant, you mentioned that you work for the Broward Sheriff's Office. What jurisdictional boundaries do you do work for the Broward Sheriff's Office?
We have the entire county of Broward.
Do you assist other agencies on occasion?
We do. So we have naturally there's I believe 27 municipalities in the county of Broward. The sheriff has 17 contracts for police services for those for 17 of them, and there's some smaller municipalities that we have what's called an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, with Lighthouse Point, Hillsborough Mile, Hillsborough Beach, the smaller agencies who don't necessarily have as much crime, but when they do, the crime scene unit for the sheriff's office will go and assist them with it. On top of that, we will assist other agencies such as Hallandale Beach. We have an MOU with them currently right now to investigate their homicides. We also will assist other agencies at the request of that agency or at the request of the state attorney's office.
So with regards to the 11 years in crime scene as a detective, what did you do before that for the sheriff's office?
Prior to that, I worked on road patrol in the city of Deerfield Beach. And prior to that, I worked in the jail for 2 years.
So in terms of your entire time at the sheriff's office, how many years do you have in?
I'm getting ready to start number 20.
Okay. Going on to specifically your training and experience in the crime scene unit. Do you take specialized training when you are brought into the crime scene unit as a detective?
Yes, so for the Broward Sheriff's Office, we start off our brand new detectives with 1,000 hours, which equals about 1 year of on-the-job training. We also have them attend multiple classes, medical examiner, death investigation classes, shooting classes, and bloodstain classes, and footwear and tire wear examination classes. And we also are all registered with the IAI, which is called the International Association of Identification. And we make sure that we're all certified within that unit.
So in terms of maintaining the IAI, or International Association of Identification certification, what's required?
So there's actually a very long, there's a test that goes with that, and lots of studying. We need to know a lot of forensic work, how to use a camera properly, which is probably the most challenging part of the class, because naturally we need to capture the scene, and a lot of times the scenes are at night, so the nighttime photography becomes the challenge for most of our detectives as they come into our unit. So we have to be proficient in photography, proficient in investigations, make sure that a suicide is really a suicide and not a homicide, or a hanging is really a hanging. So we're all taught how to investigate these things and recognize the differences between what is presented to us versus what it really is.
Okay, so I want to go back. You mentioned you'd spent a number of years on road patrol as well before becoming a crime scene detective. While you were on road patrol, did you have to deal with traffic crash reconstruction?
Yes, so in road patrol, I was fortunate enough, like I said, to work in the city of Deerfield Beach. They're a very good city for the sheriff's office. They support the deputies very well. Each city has what's called LETF funds, which is law enforcement trust funds. It's money seized from drug forfeitures, drug money, drug cars, stuff like that. And the city actually sets aside $25,000 a year at that time to send deputies to schools. I opted to take them up on that offer and attended multiple advanced traffic homicide investigation classes, basic traffic homicide investigation classes, traffic crash reconstruction classes at that expense, which I was very fortunate to do.
So after you took some of these traffic crash reconstruction classes, approximately how many of those reconstructions did you do while working on road patrol?
A lot. Probably every single crash that I investigated, I treated it with I applied the training that I obtained just to maintain my proficiency in the training that I had on it. So whether it was a basic crash or a 5-car crash, it was all treated with the training that I had obtained.
Would that be more than 100 times you had the opportunity to use that training as a road patrol deputy?
Yes.
In terms of the actual reconstruction of a traffic crash, what types of principles are you relying upon when you're doing a recreation?
It is math. Essentially what it boils down to is math. So you're obtaining measurements, and so for instance, on a traffic crash, you skid, you hit a car, and and you come to a stop. So that you have measurements of the skid marks to obtain a speed. You have measurements of the crush damage from each vehicle, and you also have what's called coefficient of friction, which is the gripping, if you will, of the road. So all of that requires trig, and it all gets put into a very long math equation to actually calculate the speed that the person was going when they crashed into the other car or wall or tree, whatever they crash into. And the same things are applied if they don't skid. So if they don't skid and they crash right into a tree without even touching the brakes, that crush damage also gets applied to determine their speed.
So Detective, it sounds like you used a lot of that high school trigonometry and geometry that we learned.
Yes.
It's been a while, so I'm gonna have to ask you to go slow on some of that if you don't mind, okay?
Okay.
With regards to shooting reconstruction, how does the traffic crash reconstruction help and make you a better shooting reconstructionist?
So it's the same principles that of math that are applied in the traffic crash reconstruction that would be applied in shooting reconstruction.
So going into specifically shooting reconstruction courses, have you taken a number of those while working as a crime scene detective?
I have.
And can you talk about the number of ones that you've taken?
I've taken West Virginia State University shooting reconstruction class and a shooting reconstruction class with the University of North Florida, the Institute of Police Technology and Management.
And in terms of the number of hours in shooting reconstruction courses and those two that you just discussed, approximately how many?
Approximately 80 hours.
Additionally, have you taken the basic traffic homicide investigation course?
Yes.
And you talked about traffic crash reconstruction courses. Have you taken other ones of those while you've been a crime scene detective?
For traffic crash?
Yes.
No.
Do you take a class in terms of death investigations?
Yes.
And what is that?
So death investigations is to determine what you're looking at when you see a deceased body. So I always like to say that the body's the biggest rat on the planet. It will, if you know what you're looking for, you'll be able to determine what happened.
So Detective, or Sergeant, sorry, I'm still getting used to that one. Sergeant, in terms of the time of arrival on scene, is crime scene there before the medical examiner's office?
Yes,
Okay. So when you are first looking and determining whether or not a death is suspicious, you're the first person looking at that body.
correct.
So could you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what that Principles of Death Investigation class taught you briefly?
So it would teach us if we're dealing with an overdose, what to look for when we're dealing with an overdose. It would teach us if it's what to look for with, if there's gunshot wounds, what to look for if you have what looks to be nothing. You just have a body there and 23-year-old male who just died. Teaches us what to look for. So we're looking for petechia hemorrhaging, which you'll see in the eyes, which are little blood vessels that are throughout your whole entire body. And if they are squeezed, if you have a particular like squeeze, you'll see petechia hemorrhaging in the eyes. You see it on the bottom of the eyelids. You also see it in the chest quite often. In an area where there's trauma of like strangulation, you'll see lots of petechia hemorrhaging. So that's just some of what we're looking for when we're making our determination on what actually happened with this, with the decedent.
During the death investigation course, does it give you a general idea of how to collect evidence on those cases?
Yes.
Do you also have training in specific crime scene investigations and collection of evidence?
Yes.
About how many hours?
Oh, that was 40 hours also.
Okay. And in terms of your day-to-day job when you were in crime scene, how much of your time was spent actually collecting, documenting, and preserving evidence?
So we are quite busy in Broward County. There's only 12 of us, and we have, like I said, 17 cities to serve, and our MOU cities. So roughly 1 or 2 a day.
So would that be half of your time?
Yes.
You talked a little bit about shooting reconstruction courses that you took. Can you tell the ladies and gentlemen a little bit about what is an approach angle or an angle of entry?
An angle of entry would be from a projectile or a bullet into a target. So it's the flight path, if you will, as it's going in. That flight path would then once it makes its contact with its target, we would then be able to determine its angle of entry.
And is that similar to some of the things you do in the traffic crash reconstruction with approach angles of cars hitting one another?
Yes, so approach angles would also apply to traffic crash investigations. It's a little different. It's the same math, but essentially if you have a car that T-bones another car, one car is going 80 and the other car is going 40, what happens is due to physics and velocity, they end up switching speeds, and the 40-mile-an-hour car goes faster and the 80-mile-an-hour car goes slower. So those are part of approach angles, and that's how we would be able to determine pre-crash speed and post-crash speed. So a lot of times you'll see that you'll have a higher speed from the original and a lower speed from the original, and it throws people off sometimes.
So does this also help with the shooting reconstruction? You're using that same angle math.
Yes.
Have you taken classes in blood stain pattern analysis?
Yes.
Can you explain what that is first?
So blood is a unique liquid. It contains, it's unlike any liquid on the planet, so it has unique features when it is altered. So when it's outside of the body and contact is made with it, it will create a pattern. Or if you have, say, a knife and you stab it into somebody and you pull that knife out, the knife naturally will have blood on it, and that blood coming back on the knife, with the knife coming in the backwards position, will come off of the blade and it will make a stain. Or if you take blood and hit it with a hammer, it will make a different type of stain. So there's several types of stains that are associated with blood stain, and those all need to be interpreted to determine exactly what happened, and in some cases it can tell you where the assailant was.
Okay. In terms of blood stain pattern analysis, how long was that class that you took?
40 hours.
Do they have a discussion about what is blowback?
Yes.
What is that?
So blowback is very simple. The easiest way that I can explain it is, and everybody in this courtroom, this has happened to them. You have your garden hose with the big nozzle on it, and you get ready to wash the car, and you hit the rim, and what happens? The water comes right back at you and hits you in the face. The same thing would happen with blowback. So if you're in close vicinity with a firearm and you shoot somebody, depending on where you shoot them at on their body, the blood will come back in that same direction of the velocity that it came from. So if it came from me to you, if the bullet went from me to you, the blood is going to come from you to me. Same thing as the garden hose theory. It's a phenomenon that happens. It's all with Newton. Newton figured it all out, and he was very right, and you can't ever escape it.
So with regards to that, if you shoot a dead body, do you have the same blowback pattern?
No, you will not.
Why not?
So a dead body, it does not have any circulation. So there's no blood flowing through the body. Post-mortem, once you're dead, what happens is we get what's called rigor mortis, which is also called lividity. And what that is pooling of the blood. So if you die on your back, almost immediately the blood starts to pool all the way to your back. So all the blood will just kind of, gravity brings it all the way down to your back. Eventually it will become fixed and it will stay there. So if we roll you over, it will not go back in that other direction. If it's not yet fixed, we can flip the body over and the blood will then flow the other way again.
Is that something that would help determine an approximate time of death?
Yes, so lividity starts to kick in anywhere between 4 to 6 hours after death. It will become fixed approximately 18 hours after death. So generally when we come in contact with a body, we will check for lividity. And a lot of times, I could probably show on my hand, if you touch and then let go, you see that my hand was red because there's blood there, and then I push and it's white, but it then refills with blood. With lividity, that's called blanching. So it's not, when lividity blanches, that means that lividity is not fixed. Remember I told you that it will become permanent. So if we touch the lividity portion of a body and it doesn't blanch, then we know that the lividity is fixed and we know an approximate time of death.
In terms of the goal of a crime scene detective or reconstruction, what are you trying to work backwards to?
Can you restate that?
Sure. Do you know when you go there and see a body, what happened before?
Not right away.
So what is your goal in any sort of crime scene reconstruction?
To read the crime scene. So I want to read what the crime scene is telling me. The crime scene is going to, it sounds corny, but it's going to talk to me. It's going to tell me what happened, where it happened. It's not going to necessarily tell me why. I'm not interested in why, but I am interested in what happened, where it happened, and what evidence was left behind due to the actions of what happened.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about the crime scene photography you do as well, and the crime scene reconstruction of a shooting incident. Do you also have training just in homicide investigation and advanced homicide investigations?
I do.
And what types of timeframes and hours on those?
For homicide investigation was a 40-hour class, and advanced homicide investigation was another 40-hour class.
So Sergeant Williams, with regards to your on-the-job experience, do you have training and experience putting those skills that you learned into practice?
Yes.
Approximately how many death investigations did you go to during your 11 years in crime scene?
Approximately 800.
In terms of, as a crime scene traffic homicide crash, did you go to incidents in which the vehicle was the weapon?
Yes.
And how many times was that an issue?
Twice.
And in terms of the shooting reconstructions, how many times have you had the opportunity to use those skills in practice?
So those skills and practices, I would say well over 100. Any time that a shooting reconstruction can be done, it will be done. And it's important. Our job in crime scene is to figure out what happened, corroborate stories, and if the evidence is going to corroborate somebody's story. So it's that's, if it can be reconstructed, then naturally we're going to reconstruct it.
And in terms of prior opportunities to testify in court as a shooting reconstruction expert, have you done it?
Yes.
Approximately how many times?
2 other times
And in what jurisdiction was that?
here in Broward County.
Going in terms of when you're doing these shooting reconstructions, what are your first step in this process?
The first step is, so if in a car, in a house, or just in general?
Yes.
Okay. So the first step obviously is to say we have a house. First step is to process our scene and collect as much evidence as we can before we do any type of reconstruction. So we want to document as much as possible, collect as much as possible, because low cards theory for crime scene is you introduce something to a crime scene every time you enter, and you take something away from a crime scene every time you exit. So therefore, we want to maintain low card and stay in, document, collect, process the scene before we do any type of reconstruction.
So, Sergeant, is a shooting reconstruction an absolute fact of what happened, or a reasonable explanation?
It's a reasonable explanation.
Why is that?
Because I wasn't there. I wasn't there to witness it. I wasn't there to stop it. So there's no way for me to be absolute. I can be pretty close though.
Okay, so talking, you said, on low card and not introducing anything new to the crime scene. What types of measures do you take to make sure you don't leave any evidence of your entry into the crime scene behind?
So we'll generally don tie-back suits, which if you've ever watched Forensic Files or anything, you see us in the goofy Smurf suits, gloves, masks, eyewear. And the whole purpose of that is we don't want our hair in there, we don't want our DNA in there, we don't want our fingerprints in there, and our sweat. We want to try to gather as much evidence from us and contain it in the Smurf suit.
Okay, in terms of, you said you weren't there, can you ever state with 100% certainty, absent a video, how a firearm was being held?
No.
Can you ever say with 100% certainty exactly how many feet a shooter was away from a moving target?
A standard or a standing shooter to a moving target?
Yes.
No.
What about the opposite? You have a moving shooter and a stationary target.
No.
Why not?
Because, excuse me, I'm sorry.
If you need water or anything, please let me know.
So the movement of these items is going to create false distances because the target has the receiving end of the bullet, the projectile, has moved. So if the receiving end of the projectile is stationary, then we can do a complete reconstruction.
So if there's movement involved, that complicates it.
Yes.
Are you trying to make and determine locations potentially to look for evidence?
I'm sorry?
In doing a shooting reconstruction, are you trying to look for areas in which evidence might be collected?
I would, if I'm doing a reconstruction for one of my scenes, I would have all the evidence collected prior to that. If it's in a car, sometimes if I can't find a projectile, when I begin my reconstruction, my trajectory rod will generally lead me to a projectile. And when it does, then we come to a grinding halt, grab the camera, photograph what we found, and collect what we found, and then continue on with our reconstruction.
So, Sergeant Williams, to explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, if you have one projectile mark in the wall behind you, and you're trying to figure out where in this courtroom you would look for casings or surveillance footage, is that something shooting reconstruction would help with?
It would help with, it would definitely help, but we could also, if it perforated the wall, then we can do a reconstruction. And perforation is all the way through. Penetration, it goes in and it stays.
And in terms of, so we're clear on that, can you do a reconstruction on a penetrating gunshot defect?
No.
What about a perforating one?
Perforating, yes.
What?
Because we have a second hole. So if we only have one hole, the projectile did not complete its flight path because it was stopped. So because it did not complete the flight path, I cannot tell you the angle or the trajectory that it came in at. But if it perforates it and creates an additional hole, now it has completed a flight path. Even if it goes into a third or fourth target, the initial first and second hole is that actual flight path or trajectory of that projectile.
And in terms of, you talked about like secondary targets, intervening targets, is that something you've done training and experience in looking at when you're doing a shooting reconstruction?
Yes.
For example, glass. Does that have specific properties that you would look for deflection?
So glass, so tempered glass, which is what is in every vehicle, mainly because if you're driving down the road and so a rock comes off a truck and it hits your windshield, you don't want it to shard and stab you in the eye as you're driving down the road. So all of the glass inside an automobile is tempered glass, which means that it goes into little tiny pieces. It also has a piece of plastic or clear plastic in the middle. It's actually two pieces of glass with a piece of plastic in the middle, which keeps it intact. But the tempered glass will create some type of movement to a projectile. Generally, it will cause, depending on the spin of the projectile, so as some barrels of the gun are going to rotate the projectile to the right, and some will rotate it to the left, and some will not rotate it at all. Generally, they're all rotated to the right, so when the projectile enters into the tempered glass, the projectile will tend to go to the right. It won't necessarily alter the trajectory, it's just turning it.
Okay, so this is things that have been documented and studied in the field of shooting reconstruction.
Yes.
In terms of other materials, sheet metal, wood, are these other items that you would look at and determine whether they were involved before you go forth and render an opinion on a shooting reconstruction?
Yes.
So going back into, I want to make sure it's clear, how does the discipline of shooting reconstruction differ from firearms and tool marks?
So firearms and tool marks deals with the identification of the internal workings of a firearm and the cartridge cases of the that come out of the firearm and the projectiles that come out of the firearm. They deal with that part, where I will deal with the ballistics part of it, of shooting reconstruction.
So when you say ballistics, do you mean inside the gun or outside the gun?
Outside of the gun.
In terms of, can you define what is a terminal ballistics?
Terminal ballistics is the projectile has stopped, and where it stopped is considered terminal.
In terms of this specific case, did you make any promises as to the outcome of your investigation before it started?
No.
What did you say when you were contacted to look at this case?
I said that I'll take a look at it and we'll see what I come up with.
And do you have any sort of fixed determination when you look at any shooting reconstruction?
No.
Do you recall at what point you were first contacted to assist in this case?
I believe it was November of 2020.
Okay, with regards to that, who contacted you?
You, ma'am.
Okay. What were you asked to look at and analyze in this case?
I was asked to determine if this shooting incident was a drive-by shooting.
So, if there was any other forensic testing that could be done, would you suggest that as well?
Yes.
Did you do that in this case?
Yes.
If you could just briefly, were you asked to consult at all with regards to cell phones?
No.
Any sort of location data or anything with regards to the location of an individual?
Location data, no. Location of an individual, yes.
And that's within the car?
Correct.
In terms of, were you asked to consult on any sort of the medical examiner's office findings?
Their findings, obviously their findings are final, but I needed their photographs and their measurements that they conducted. So I did reach out to obtain their reports and their photographs.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the physical evidence that you reviewed. Did you review the car in question in this case?
Yes.
Where was that car being held and stored?
That car was being held at the Broward Sheriff's Office confiscation warehouse.
And if you could explain briefly to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what that warehouse looks like on the inside.
It is basically a gigantic warehouse that stores cars that are involved in crime.
In terms of in this warehouse, are the cars sealed individually in each location?
Yes.
What types of materials are used to prevent cross-contamination from the various cars?
All of the cars are closed. They are sealed with red evidence tape. If windows are missing, plastic goes over them so that nothing can get into the car. The plastic would assume the role of windows so that nothing can get inside.
Okay. In terms of the security of that building, is anyone allowed to come and go into that building?
Absolutely not.
When you are doing an analysis of this Jeep, this car in this case, how do you do that?
So in this case, I actually had that, the vehicle in question towed from the confiscation warehouse to the crime scene unit, which has a forensic processing garage. And from there, I began my investigation on the vehicle.
The forensic processing garage, where is that located?
What floor are we on? Fourth?
Fourth.
4 floors down.
And can you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury how the forensic processing garage is outfitted?
So it's outfitted, actually has a car lift in it so that we can lift the car in the air, look underneath, see if there's anything in there. There's a plasma cutter in there, there's torches in there. Every tool that you can think of that you would find in a mechanic shop plus more is available in that garage.
Okay. In terms of you mentioned you reviewed some of the medical examiner's information and photographs. What other things did you review in this case?
I reviewed the crime scene photos that were taken by the Miramar Police Department.
And those were provided to you and the medical examiner's office. Any other photos or any other documentation that you reviewed from the Miramar Police Department?
I reviewed the crime scene unit report from Mr. Kelly.
With regards to the trajectory analysis that was done by the Miramar Police Department, did you review those photographs?
Yes.
Tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what was the issue with the string.
So the Miramar Police Department used string with a putty, and they attached the string to the beginning of the projectile hole on the back of the seat of this vehicle. And then they took that string and they brought it back to a big ruler. However, the string...
Sergeant, let me interrupt you for just a second. With regards to their attempt to recreate the back glass, what was the purpose of that?
I believe, to determine some type of trajectory.
Is that something that would be useful in this case?
The trajectory would be useful, yes.
But what about trying to recreate that back windshield and the heights that a specific projectile would have gone in?
Yes.
And with going forward, you were mentioning and talking about the strings, were they taut in a straight line?
No, the strings actually were sagging, which can cause inaccurate readings.
So in terms of that was the specific issue you took with their trajectory analysis.
Correct.
In terms of the trajectory rods that were placed through the car by the Miramar Police Department, were there any issues or concerns that you could see from the photographs?
Not with the rods.
So in terms of the data that you relied upon, the physical car, how did you process that?
So I actually, once the car got into our garage, I photographed it in place, and then I put on my Smurf suit, and I actually sat in the car.
Okay, in terms of, you said you photographed it. Prior to coming into court today, did you have an opportunity to review the photographs that you took in this case?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm gonna show you what's been previously shown to defense counsel and marked for identification as states quadruple D. Detective Williams, do you recognize this flash drive?
Yes,
How do you recognize that flash drive?
those are my initials and ID.
Did you have the opportunity to look at the photos on the drive before you came to court?
Yes,
Do they fairly and accurately depict your involvement and role in this investigation?
yes, they do.
Here at this time, the state would request to move state quadruple D in as state 77.
Any objection?
No objection, Principal. I just need to know the date that that was relates to.
All of them,
The date.
all the dates. All the photos are on one listing.
Okay. All right, no objection.
It'll be admitted.
States quadruple D will be marked state 77.
Okay. So Detective, I'm going to start with publishing these, and you took a number of photographs.
Yes.
So I want to start and do them in order by time. So- So I'm going to start here. You mentioned the blue Smurf suit, so I'm going to start with what's been labeled as CSW 6747. Is this the Smurf suit you were talking about?
Yes,
And is that you in that photograph?
absolutely not.
Okay. I won't tell him you said that. So I want to go forward here to 6762. Can you describe for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what we're looking at in this photo?
So this is inside our processing garage. This is the vehicle in question, and these are trajectory rods that have been inserted into the vehicle to terminal points.
What is the purpose of putting in these trajectory rods and photographing them?
The purpose of putting them in is, number one, to create a trajectory. Number two, the picture is for demonstrative purposes to show where the projectiles, how the projectiles entered into the vehicle. They don't necessarily, just where the ends of the projectiles are, do not necessarily reflect where a shooter was standing. However, they just reflect where the trajectory or the angle into the vehicle is.
Okay, so we talked about angles, so I want to make sure that we can understand that. Are you taking angle measurements from these trajectory rods?
So what I'm doing is I'm creating a right triangle with geometry with these trajectory rods in order to obtain an angle. Some people will use a protractor to do that. However,
Wait, it's been a while since geometry. Explain what a protractor is, please.
so the protractor is always flat on one end and it has a half moon on the other. May I stand?
Please, if you would, yes.
So if you use a protractor, and obviously a vehicle is angled, it's aerodynamic, so some of it comes out like this, some cars like that. If you use a protractor, and obviously a protractor has to be flat, you're going to get an incorrect angle. So I use geometry to create a right triangle, which would then give me the actual angle of each site mark.
So Sergeant, are you telling me that you use the Pythagorean theorem in your day-to-day work?
Yes.
I think I owe an apology to my high school geometry teacher. Okay, so talking about that, is that a squared plus b squared equals c squared?
Yes,
And what does that tell you?
that tells me an angle. So obviously you have, it has to equal 180 degrees. We start off always at 90, and then we would work our way to determining that angle.
Are you looking at more than one angle on each of these particular entrance defects?
There are different angles for each site mark.
Are you looking at the vertical angle?
These are all going to be horizontal angles.
Okay. And when you say we're using
I'm sorry, vertical angles, yes.
And so we're using a poster board and a knitting needle help demonstrate the different types of angles that you're measuring on that.
A knitting angle, needle?
That's what I had.
Okay, yeah, that'll work.
Okay. Here, let's say it would be using a demonstrative exhibit here.
Thank you. Again, ladies and gentlemen, the witness is using a demonstrative exhibit to assist in explaining and illustrating his testimony. The testimony, the evidence is the testimony of the witness. The demonstratives, unless they are later received in evidence, are not in evidence and do not go back to the jury room during your deliberations.
Okay, so showing counsel it's been marked as A, B, and C. If you need to move on.
You're gonna be facing it that way.
Facing out. So starting with what this demonstrative is on strike mark A. If you, to illustrate, would you show the ladies and gentlemen of the jury how you would insert a trajectory rod if you were trying to do the trajectory of strike mark A, and we're going to hold it at a 90-degree angle.
So naturally, just to put a disclaimer here, this is only one hole. So I would need a second hole to complete this. However, you would start with the inserting the trajectory rod, and you would follow. You don't just shove it in. You actually gently follow the flight path of the projectile until it reaches terminal, and then we stop.
So if you could explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, when you're looking at the vertical angle, what part of it are you measuring?
So I would measure from the ground to the actual strike mark. That would be a measurement that I would need. The ground to the tip of the rod, and then the length of the rod that is sticking out from the projectile hole. That all gets put into fancy math, and it produces an angle.
And so the angle that you are measuring, if you could just show with your finger what angle you're trying to figure out.
Trying to get the trajectory angle, the flight path of the projectile.
So is that side to side or top to bottom?
That's going to be from top to bottom.
Okay. So that on strike mark A, does this illustrate a practically 90 degree?
Yes.
Okay, moving on to strike mark B here. Would you use the same math on this particular type of trajectory entrance or exit?
Yes.
Okay, and so when you're talking about the vertical angle here, what area are you looking at and measuring?
The same one. So we'll go from the ground to the strike mark, the ground to the tip of the rod, and then from the strike mark entry to the end of the rod for the length of the rod.
And in terms of the side-to-side angle, or azimuth as it's sometimes referred to, is this again at a 90 degrees to the side of this piece of poster board?
Yes.
Moving on to strike mark C. How would you do the same trajectory analysis on strike mark C?
Strike mark C would be very similar with we would want to know that the entrance or the ground to the strike mark. the ground to the tip of the rod, but then we would have to get a horizontal distance and use the, I'm trying to remember offhand, the side of the wall to the tip of the rod.
So you're then getting the azimuth or the entry angle on the
Correct.
side to side?
Correct.
Okay. In terms of the math and everything else, you're making the same right triangle every time?
Yes.
Okay. So what you're doing with these trajectory rods, is this repeatable?
Yes.
Can someone come back and check your work?
Yes.
In terms of the projectiles in this case, what was your goal when you start doing these trajectory rods?
The goal was the request, which was to determine if this was a drive-by shooting.
Okay. With the perforations or defects in the car, are you matching them up with any and all recovered projectiles?
Yes.
So I want to go, and in terms of, you mentioned that there was, if you found a projectile or you thought there should be a projectile somewhere, you would stop and look for it.
Yes,
Can you explain if that happened in this case?
it did.
Okay, and so I want to go forward and go to some of your photos from the recovery of projectiles. Did you recover projectiles in this case?
2 projectiles were recovered from this vehicle.
And where were they recovered from?
The first projectile was recovered from underneath the back seat,
Okay.
and the second projectile was recovered on the passenger side interior B pillar.
Okay, so I'm going to go forward and show the jury what's been labeled as CSW_677. What are we looking at here in this photo?
May I stand?
Please. And there's actually a red rod right next to you that if you want to point with that.
Right here is a projectile, right here. That was recovered from the seat. So the seat was actually lifted up and that projectile was recovered from underneath the seat.
And so when you're saying underneath the seat, what seat are you talking about?
The back seat.
Did you have to remove the seat to get to that projectile?
I did.
Okay, and in CSW 6778, is that another view of that same projectile?
Correct.
So you mentioned there was an additional projectile recovered from this car, and you said the B pillar?
The passenger side B pillar interior.
And so if you could orient the ladies and gentlemen of the jury in what we're looking at in photo CSW 6772, what area of the car are we looking at?
This is the passenger side interior B pillar.
Okay, and so if you could explain where the front seat passenger would be in relation to this photo. Great.
Can you blow it up?
Sure. Actually,
guess not.
Detective, or
Okay.
Sergeant, sorry, I think council needs to approach.
We need a short recess, ladies and gentlemen. Do not discuss the case, don't form any opinion about the case, don't allow anyone to discuss the case in present. Absolutely no research. Just leave no dead end. Thank you. Let the record reflect the jury stepped out. Defense.
Yes.
Howard, you're all set, ready to go?
Yes, sir.
All right, let's bring the jury. Jury entry. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Please be seated. Let the record once again reflect the presence of the defendant, his counsel, the assistant state attorney, and the ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Our witness, Sergeant Williams, remains on stand. If you're ready to proceed with your direct counsel, you may.
Thank you. Okay, Sergeant, so I'm going through some of the photos, and here we have the first photo that you took in this case. What were you documenting?
This is documenting the vehicle as it initially came to me, with the plastic wrap around the window that was broken out, and showing the tag as well.
Okay, and is this the vehicle that you did the analysis on?
Yes,
And what tag from the state of Florida was assigned?
that is the tag IEKD22.
Excuse me, could we get the date? I did not recall the date that this was done.
Sure, no problem. Sergeant, were these photos from the initial evaluation of the Jeep?
December 17th, 2021.
And so based on that, when was the initial date you were contacted by myself to review this?
November 16, 2021.
Okay. So if there's anything you need to refer to your report, just let us know so you can refresh your recollection.
Yes, ma'am.
So you said December 17th, 2021, sorry.
Yes,
Okay, and did you document the evidence tape and the seals on this car?
I did.
Going on to the side view of the vehicle, what are we looking at here?
This is the side of the vehicle that has defects in it, and
I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Are these letters things you put on there?
these letters were placed by the Miramar Police Department.
When you continued with your trajectory and shooting Reconstruction, did you maintain the same letters when referring to the various defects?
I assumed these letters.
Okay. And so if we can just describe for the record the locations of each of these letters on this vehicle, starting with I.
I would be in the passenger side rear door panel, exterior panel.
Okay. J,
Same,
K,
same,
L,
same,
M.
same.
Okay, moving on to N, O, and P.
These projectiles site marks are on the passenger side front door exterior.
And again, in this next photo, what are you documenting?
These are the seals.
So going around to the seals have now been broken, what are you documenting in this photo?
This would be the driver's side rear door that is ajar, with a photograph showing the door ajar and the compartment area of that passenger side.
Okay. So in continuing, down here in the floor, there's another object with a blue piece of foam in it. What is that?
That would be the glove box of the vehicle.
Why is the glove box in the back seat?
The glove box had to be removed to remove the infotainment center of the vehicle.
And in terms of on the far side door, that doesn't look like the inside of any car door I've seen. Why is there pieces of it missing?
Can you zoom?
Sure. So all the black plastic's been removed? from
Correct.
the passenger
So
side.
that was removed for a footwear examination that was done on the vehicle.
There's some gray substance here. Can you describe to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what happens to blood after it sits for 5 years?
Blood begins to break down after time, and actually it has bacteria, or if you will, as organisms that begin to break it down. DNA is in there, obviously, so it actually begins to eat itself, if you will, and that's essentially what is left behind.
And so going forward now through the photographs, I want to get to some of the ones with the individuals in the Tyvek Smurf suits. Starting here on 4851, what are you documenting in this particular image?
This is a photograph of the rear compartment or the back seat of the Jeep Compass,
Side width at shoulder height of the vehicle.
51 inches.
Why do you measure and document all of these measurements on the Jeep?
Well, this is a unique case because you have a shooting incident that occurred inside a vehicle. And because it did, we can use these measurements to determine particular investigative leads, such as where a shooter could be and a distance of the end of the barrel of the firearm. So because it's a compartmentalized area, unlike being out in the open field where we have so many variables, the variables are severely limited because it's inside a compartmentalized area.
And so we'll get into why you can make that determination in just a little bit. I want to start in terms of the angles of impact for each of the strike marks on the outside of the car and on the back of the rear passenger seats. Did you do the angles of impact on each of those?
Yes.
Okay. So after the measurements in terms of the seats as well, here, what are you documenting in this photo, CSW 4855?
That would be the distance from the back seat back, if you will, where you put your back, to the back of the front seat.
And what was that distance determined to be?
39 inches.
And what are you showing in this photo?
That would be the other end of the tape measure.
So I want to go here on the ceiling, S1 with the arrow pointed to a cutout. Was that also related to a patent or a footwear impression?
Yes, so that cutout, prior to that cutout in the headliner, there was a footwear impression on the headliner that was examined.
Okay, in terms of this measurement here, what are you showing the distance from?
Showing the distance from the from the driver's side rear passenger seat back to the passenger front seat, front of the
Is that the headrest?
headrest, yeah.
Okay. And then do you determine that measurement as well to the bottom of the seat?
Yes,
Okay. And what was that measurement?
39 inches.
And on the previous measurement, it was a similar?
39 inches.
So in terms of going forward in the reconstruction process, once you have put in all the trajectory rods and gotten the angles, what's the next step that you need to do?
From here, I continued my analysis of the vehicle. Because of the fact that I found the two projectiles, I wanted to ensure that anything else relevant to the investigation was collected, so I examined the vehicle further.
Okay, so, and then it's showing defense counsel what's been marked as states quadruple E for identification purposes only. Do you recognize the exhibits in states quadruple E?
I do.
And how do you recognize those?
That is my handwriting and my name on it, and it is sealed with red evidence tape with my initials and ID.
Did you collect those items?
I did.
What are they?
These are two projectiles that were recovered from the vehicle.
And are those the two that we viewed previously in the photographs?
We've only reviewed one in the photograph.
Just the one in the back, and then the other one you mentioned was recovered from what location?
From the driver's side, or I'm sorry, passenger side B pillar
And if you
interior.
show in this photo that's up here, and you can touch the screen in front of you as well, and it will put a little arrow as to where is the passenger side B pillar. Okay. And are those projectiles in the same or substantially same condition as when you recovered them?
Can I open them?
Please. Okay, scissors should be fine.
They are.
Here at this time, the state would request to move state quadruple E in as 78.
Any objection?
No objection.
It'll be admitted.
States quadruple E will be marked states number 78.
So you mentioned that you did some additional searching on the car once you realized that there was other projectiles in there. Did you find
Correct.
any other items of evidentiary value?
I did.
And what would that be?
I observed what appeared to be blowback on the headliner of the vehicle.
And so if you could explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, where is the headliner on the vehicle?
It is above your head as you're seating in the car. It actually just is there for cosmetic purposes, so you don't see your roof.
So showing defense counsel what's been previously identified as states triple T. Sergeant, do you recognize state what's been marked for identification as states triple T?
I do.
How do you recognize that item?
This is my handwriting, my name. It is sealed with red evidence tape with my initials and ID.
And what is that item?
This would be the headliner with the blowback on it that I cut out.
And do you recall on what date you cut that out?
That was cut out on December May I just look over
Or does
the,
it reflect on the packaging? in
oh
any
yes,
way?
12/17/21.
And is that in the same, essentially same condition as when you recovered it?
Mayor, would it?
Please. You have gloves there if you need them.
Yes, it is, minus the testing that I did, a cutting, and a cutting that the lab did.
Here at this time, the state would request to move states triple T in as state 79.
Any objection?
No, sir.
It will be admitted.
And Detective, if you'd be so kind, I'm going to ask you to publish this particular item to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury.
States triple T, it's been marked states 79.
You may.
And Detective, if you could hold it up and show the back of it as well, and then indicate which part went to the front of the vehicle.
Do you have the picture of the headliner?
Sure. Oh, sorry. Would this photo help in assisting you in the location?
And I object to the leading nature of.
Will this assist you? Overruled.
Yes.
Oh,
It would be, so if the vehicle is facing this way, it would be this way.
okay, and just show the ladies and gentlemen of the jury the back of it so that it understands, okay. And in terms of what are you looking at on that piece of headliner? What does it show?
So it shows blood, and it also shows the directionality of the blood.
Okay, and if you could show on the picture that's in front of you on the screen, what your area of the car you're talking about.
Is it okay to put this away?
Please, yes.
Your Honor, maybe from the side, Dr.
Sure.
Detective, so in terms of the image that we're looking at here, can you show the ladies and gentlemen of the jury where that blowback pattern was?
It would be in, is there a way to make a circle?
Would you like to draw?
Yes.
Oh, if I may.
it would be in this area right in here. It's a little bigger than I drew, but it's in this general area right here.
Okay. In terms of the information about that DNA, why is it important to know whose DNA that is?
Well, it's unusual to have the blowback on the headliner, so of course, and for this shooting incident, we would want to identify where that blood came from. So that's why it was sent to the lab to determine whose blood it was.
And was that determination made?
It was.
Okay. And whose blood was that?
That was the front seat passenger's blood.
The, in terms of the location and the pattern, what does that tell you about the orientation of the front seat passenger's head at the time of the shooting?
The front seat passenger's head was actually down almost as if he was sleeping, so it was down, leaning on the right at an angle. So his head was at an angle as he was seated in that front seat.
Would a demonstrative of the head help illustrate that point?
Sure.
Okay. I'm showing, was previously shown to the defense counsel and used by the witness yesterday labeled as BMEO 18-3118 by Dr. McDougall.
Sure. Again, ladies and gentlemen, the witness will be using a demonstrative to assist in explaining or illustrating his testimony. Just remember that testimony of the witness is the evidence. These demonstrative aids are not to be considered as evidence unless they're later received in evidence. Only items of evidence go back with you during deliberations for your further examination.
So Sergeant Williams, Dr. McDougall indicated on that particular head that entrance and exit wound on that. Is that consistent with your review of the autopsy photographs and crime scene photographs in this case?
It is.
And based on your analysis of this vehicle, did you find any projectiles anywhere in the headliner?
No.
Did you find any projectiles in the top portion of the B pillar on the passenger side?
No.
What about the A pillar?
No.
Was there any projectiles in the front windshield?
No.
Based on your training and experience, can you state where the exit wound of that head had to have gone through? Where that projectile would have had to have exited that vehicle?
It would have exited through the front passenger window.
How can you say that?
Number one, there's no glass there. However, most importantly is the projectile entered in the back of his skull and exited through the front of his skull with his head at a resting angle. So, can I get up?
Please, if that would help and assist in showing.
So this resting angle in this seat, you have the projectile coming in, exiting through the top of the skull, and then continuing through the windshield.
You said windshield.
The window.
Can you say that it was at the top of the window, or the bottom of the window, the middle of the window?
I cannot.
So based on that projectile and the blowback, you can make what opinions?
So based on the angle of this this projectile, the blowback is indicative of a firearm being in close vicinity of the head. The head is something that bleeds profusely when it's pierced. If you've ever fallen on stairs or hit your head, it bleeds like no tomorrow. And because the projectile entered in right below the skull, the blowback ended up coming in the direction of, as I was speaking earlier about the hose, in the direction that it came from. And you will get that with a close, with a very close shot. That blowback then proceeded after the shot. It went up, it hit this headliner, and continued and falling into the back seat.
And so I want to go to some of the other photos. There's a yellow jacket that's on the very back of the vehicle. Is it important to know whose DNA and blood was found on that?
What yellow jacket?
Let me come back to that, 'cause I have the other photos, so we'll come back to
Okay.
that in a moment. Okay, so in terms of the location of the firearm that fired the shot, and we were just talking about in CSW 6745, does this attempt to accurately recreate the potential location of that firearm?
So the purpose of this photograph is strictly demonstrative to show where once the projectile enters into the head, you're going to have the blowback, which again will come up, strike the headliner, and then continue. It's actually continuing this way and landing back here behind the driver in this area of the vehicle.
In terms of the driver and the t-shirt that he was wearing, do you take into account the location of the victim's DNA on his shirt?
Well, based upon the blowback pattern up here, I would expect to find some blowback here if on a driver, if a driver was there.
So would you expect to find the DNA of Anthony Williams on the front of the driver's shirt?
Yes.
Okay. And were you made aware that that is the results that were in this case?
Later on, yes.
And in terms of how does that help with a check and balance on your work?
So that confirms my analysis with the blowback, that the blowback came back, went, like I said, went up. It's going to fall here, and then it's going to continue to fall into this back seat.
Okay, so I want to move on again, and you talked about like a wound that was close. Do you look for things like stippling in photographs?
Yes, so we'll look for stippling, and it's also referred to as tattooing.
Okay, and did you notice any of that powder tattooing in the photographs of the deceased Anthony Williams?
Yes, there was some there. However, due to the fact that Anthony Williams has an intermediate object, i.e. the head back, what do that call it?
Headrest.
The
Is that the
headrest.
word you're looking for? Okay.
Due to the headrest being there, that's an intermediate item. So the projectile was able to go into the into Anthony Williams. However, whenever you fire a gun, you have gunshot residue that's going to come out of the barrel and out of the ejection port. In this case, because of the position of Mr. Williams's head and the intermediate object of the headrest assumed most of the GSR, the gunshot residue, and then only some of it went into Mr. Williams.
Without a pattern, can you give any sort of a range of distance?
No, I cannot.
So, do you also look at ejection patterns for casings?
You can look at ejection patterns. I generally don't, because it is a very strong variable. Semi-automatic firearms have springs, and depending on the age of the firearm, the springs will start to wear. The way the firearm is held will dictate where the cartridge is ejected. The spring will determine where the cartridge is ejected. If there's wind, that will have an effect. So it's not necessarily going to help with determining where, just doing any analysis on any ejection port, any ejection analysis from a firearm.
In terms of an enclosed space such as this, does that also make a difference?
It would, well, I would expect the cartridge to remain into the vehicle, and that's all I would expect for this.
In terms of the angle of the entry without the actual body, can you do that?
No.
Is it common practice to take a body and put it back in the car after autopsy?
It is not. However, it can be done if the body was in place upon scene. We can make a preliminary analysis there. I don't believe the Miramar Police Department had that opportunity. These individuals were brought right into the hospital, so that opportunity was lost.
Okay. In terms of the firearm itself, were you ever presented with a firearm that was said to you to be the one used in this case?
No.
So, we talked about the back spatter. On the medical examiner's report, did you review the medical examiner's report for the backseat passenger, Christopher Thomas?
I did.
Who was it that noticed a mislabeled entrance and exit wound?
I noticed that.
And what did you do when you realized that there was an issue or concern with the report?
I notified you that there was an issue, that a defect in Mr. Thomas was labeled twice.
Okay. And so what, after that was done, did you look through the photos from the hospital?
I did, because I observed that Mr. Thomas had a defect on his right calf area, or I'm sorry, quadricep area, the upper part of his leg. That came from the door, and it entered into the seat. And when I was looking at the autopsy photos of Mr. Thomas, I would expect to find an exit wound from the medical examiner's office, and they did not have a picture to produce that, and it wasn't annotated in their report. So again, I notified you of this discrepancy as well.
And in terms of, were you able to figure out and determine which projectile caused that specific injury based on your reconstruction?
I was.
So we talked a little bit about the shots to Anthony Williams. I'm going to move on and talk to any of the injuries to Christopher Thomas. What did you look at in review in trying to establish a shooting reconstruction of the injuries to Mr. Thomas?
So the rods from the rear of the vehicle, Mr. Thomas assumed most of his injuries from the rear of the vehicle. I believe 5 projectiles entered him from the rear of the vehicle. 1 projectile entered him on his quadricep, right quadricep.
Okay.
And I believe 2 projectiles entered him on his foot. And that's going from memory. Are these autopsy photos or?
So I'm going to come here to 6754, your photograph on that.
Okay, so these are the terminal points from the rear of the vehicle. Mr. Thomas is seated in this position, and of the 6 rounds that went into the seat, Mr. Thomas assumed 5 of them, and it is a very similar pattern in Mr. Thomas's back. It may not look like it lines up correctly.
Well,
However,
Let me interrupt you just there for a second before we go. On the top, on Photographic, that is labeled and marked as H. Did that wound intersect in any way with the body of Christopher Thomas?
no.
Where was that projectile or defect later found?
That projectile perforated that headrest and continued to go forward in the vehicle and ended up striking Mr. Williams and I believe his back.
Okay. So I want to go forward and on the back of the car. You take this picture, CSW_6760. What are you showing with this particular photograph?
So these are the trajectory rods that have entered into the vehicle. They are not exactly at the correct angle. The reason being, obviously there's no glass. So they perforated the glass first, and then they made a secondary perforation into the seats. So that's why they're not exactly level.
So, Sergeant, are you saying that the end of these rods is where those shots were fired from?
No,
Why not?
because I'm missing the glass. So the glass would, obviously, if I can take a rod and put it through the glass and then into the terminal point, I would be able to obtain this picture to be demonstrably correct.
Okay, in terms of the angles and things that you measured on these, how did you get those angle measurements?
So what I ended up doing is recreating the back glass based on putting tape across the entire back of the window and making it line up with the glass that's existing in place on the top, sides, and bottom, and lined it up with that to make the arch of the glass window, and then ended up putting these rods into the proper position, and then created my right angles to create the proper angles for these strike marks.
In terms of the location in which the gun was fired that created these defects in the car, can you say it was a certain distance away with specificity?
I can give a range for these shots and for the shots on the side of the vehicle.
Okay. And in terms of the range, are you saying it could be a mile away at a 50-foot ladder?
No, I can give a specific range.
And how can you do that in this case?
So the specific range is based upon the two shooters that were presented to me. And I would obtain measurements.
Objection, Your Honor.
What's the objection?
Can we go separate? Sure.
Sergeant, you can answer that question.
Why don't you restate your question, Councilman?
So you were discussing that how you would find and determine angles and ranges for specific individuals that are presented to you.
Yes.
How would you do that?
So I would obtain a shooting height, a maximum, what we would determine as a maximum shooting height, which would be standing with your arm out at 90 degrees. That height would be obtained from the ground to your arm, to your finger essentially. And then a minimum shooting height, which would be squatting with the same arm out and measurement from here to your finger. And then that would give me a minimum and a maximum range of fire. Once I have a minimum and maximum range of fire, that gets added into more trig to determine a minimum and maximum distance of that particular shooter.
So with regards to this incident, were you there on scene?
No,
Do you know who fired the shots?
no,
In terms of the shots to the outside of the vehicle, are you aware the individual's already dead when those were fired?
they were already dead, yes.
Objection, Your Honor.
How does that play into your reconstruction?
It comes into play because specifically with Christopher Thomas, because Christopher Thomas was already deceased when these rounds were coming into the back of the vehicle, because Christopher Thomas was what we would call crumbling. He was starting to fall, if you will. And on top of that, I know that he was already deceased because the back of his back, essentially, the rounds that are in his back, have no blood in them, which means that there's no circulation. So the rounds are coming in. Christopher Thomas is crumbling with each round. He's falling with each round, and that's the answer.
Okay. So in terms of, we'll get to the shooting inside the car in a little bit. I want to stick to the outside at this point. When you were looking at the side of the car on the angles of entry and the side-to-side angles that I'm talking about, why is that important in your analysis? I'm going to go back to 4809 to describe those angles.
So these angles are important because it is part of my assignment, which is to determine if this is a drive-by shooting. And my determination was that this is not a drive-by shooting, and it's based upon this picture here, which is a very good picture to describe it. All of these rounds are done, and all but one is done at a stationary position. The shooter is at a stationary position when all but one of these rounds are going in. The one round that has some movement in it, which is round site L here, the shooter is actually moving in that to create the little bit of a keyhole that you see there.
Okay, a lot of information in that answer, so let's break it down a little bit. You mentioned a keyhole, so I'm going to zoom in on site L and explain what is a keyhole.
So a keyhole is a projectile comes out of the barrel and it is actually spinning in a line. It's also falling as it spins. However, once you add movement to the gun at the same time the projectile is coming out, you introduce that movement to the projectile. Once the projectile has altered movement, it will start to tumble. So it's no longer going in a straight line, it is actually going like head over feet, if you will, as it's entering into its target. And that head over feet gives you this right here, which is essentially the projectile coming in sideways.
And in terms of a drive-by shooting, if two vehicles were moving at 45 miles per hour, what would you expect to see?
So if it's a drive-by shooting, all of these rounds should look like this,
Why?
because movement is being introduced to that projectile.
So to contrast site L with one of the other sites like U, what does that tell you?
So that's a shot that the shooter is stationary. The vehicle is stationary.
And so, Sergeant, were you given a copy of what's been previously introduced into evidence, the statement of the co-defendant Cortland Henry?
No.
Okay, in terms of the information as to the suspected location on Miramar Parkway that was initially reported to law enforcement, was that told to you?
The hospital scene?
No, right off of I-75.
Objection relevant.
Excuse me, why don't you come sidewalk?
About the Miramar Parkway and I-75 location.
The number road one?
No, not there yet. We'll get there. So in terms of, for your training and experience, if two vehicles are moving on a roadway at the same speed, identical speed, are you still going to get these keyholes on that?
Yes.
Okay. In terms of other drive-by shootings that you have investigated, have you seen straight 90-degree entry angles on those?
Absolutely not.
What instead is going to be more indicative of a drive-by shooting?
Keyholes.
Okay. In terms of changes in the entry angle, side to side, what would you look for in an actual drive-by shooting?
I would look for directionality and, again, the keyholes. So if you have two vehicles going in the same direction, I would expect them to have the keyholes, but I would also, if you're being shot at, it's natural to step on the gas and go, which would put you
Objection, Your Honor.
either,
Excuse me, what's the objection? Now,
This is
these-
speculation. Speculation.
which would put you either above or forward or behind your shooter. And once that happens, I mean, it's human nature, then we would start to have directionality keyholes from different directions.
And
There's
in-
no way that you're gonna sit there and let someone shoot you.
Okay. In terms of, is there a demonstrative that would assist in showing the jury what you mean by directionality?
Yes, I believe I have one actually. Or you have one, okay.
You've previously shown defense counsel.
And I'm objecting on the same basis. Discuss.
It's a demonstrative at this point, Your Honor, so I believe the appropriate instruction should be read.
Thank you. Can I see what you're showing?
Sure.
There's objection to this. The witness is going to be using a demonstrative to assist in explaining or illustrating his testimony. Testimony of the witness is the evidence. The demonstrative is not evidence unless it's later received as evidence, and so it shouldn't be considered as evidence. The evidence is the witness' testimony. If it's later received in evidence, it'll go back to the jury room with you during deliberations. If it's never not received in evidence, it won't. All right?
And so you mentioned directionality. Can you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what's being illustrated in this demonstrative photo?
So these are, obviously the author of this book has already identified the angle for all of these, so that I'm not going to discuss the angle. The question is directionality, and the directionality for each of these is you'll be looking for the leading edge of the entrance. So for this particular, so we'll start with 40 degrees. This is the leading edge, so the projectile is actually going in this way. This one here, this is the leading edge, projectile is going in this way. For this one here, on 60 degrees, this one is quite unique actually. It's actually coming in this way, going down, that's our leading edge. For the 30 degrees, our leading edge is coming in this way. I don't know what is next, what's below that. For the 20 degrees, you have directionality coming in this way, 10 degrees. Directionality is coming in this way.
Okay. In terms of the car in this case, did you see any indication of directionality in either direction, side to side?
None of those words were existent.
At some point, did you go out to a scene on Pembroke Road in US 27?
Yes, I did.
Why did you go out there?
I went out to US 27 and Pembroke Road, and actually brought the vehicle, had the vehicle towed out there as well, to the site that was determined by the Miramar Police Department. And I actually obtained different heights. Although I'm coming in 3 years later from this investigation. So the bank on the side of the road can be different. It can be higher, it can be lower. But I wanted to put the vehicle in place and have that have those distances as an option, and just to say that I did it. I also went out to 27 and Pembroke Road and had the Public Works Division from Miramar clear the entire brush area, and I actually was looking for a magazine to see if there was anything there, because it was relayed, my question to the Miramar Police Department was, did you guys look for anything out in this brush? And the answer was no, so I asked it to be all cleared out and thoroughly examined. Spent about 6 to 8 hours out there in knee-deep water looking for anything. The results were negative, but that was my involvement out at Pembroke Road for that point.
So you mentioned knee-deep water. What type of, when you're at that location, can you describe for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what type of area this is?
So 27 borders the Florida Everglades. East of 27 is Pembroke Road. Pembroke Road dead ends from 27 going eastbound. It dead ends, and there is a trash company there for garbage. They're on the east and it's a 2-lane road. On the north and southbound sides of the road, at the time of my examination, was grass and rock. And then if you continue further down, you come to marsh. And if you go further down, you come into water marsh. And that's about all that's out there, besides a lot of mosquitoes.
And so why is it important as a shooting reconstructionist to know the landscape in which this happened?
Well, if I would have had the landscape in 2018, it would have allowed to create a more precise distance for a shooter.
In terms of the drive-by aspect of it, does knowing that location at Pembroke Road help in assessing distances another potential car could have been?
It would not, because this definitely was not involved in a drive-by. There were fire cartridge cases found on the side of the road. I don't think a car, even when I was out there, I don't think a car can drive along that area and shoot the passenger side of that vehicle.
Okay. The additional processing that was done, did you collect a plastic bag from the Miramar Police Department?
Yes, the Miramar Police Department collected a plastic bag out of the vehicle initially during their investigation.
And what additional equipment does the Broward Sheriff's Office have to do further analysis on that?
We have a machine that's called a vacuum metal deposition machine. Essentially, it's a giant cylinder that on the bottom has 3 electrically charged trays on the front half of this chamber and 3 on the back half of the chamber. Those trays hold silver. One holds silver, one holds gold, one holds zinc. The bag, in this case, the bag was placed into this vacuum metal deposition chamber. The air is taken out of it to make it a vacuum chamber. At that point, once the chamber has been fully vacuumized, then I heated gold, which then vaporized the gold. Gold attaches to lipids, which lipids are part of your entire body, but lipids are also on your fingerprints. So vaporized gold is attracted to fingerprints. After the vaporized gold is applied to the bag, it's followed by zinc, which the zinc gets vaporized, and that zinc kind of, for lack of better words, seals that print in place. On this particular bag, the results were negative. However, I believe something was found in it of value, and the Miramar Police Department does not have the capability to, they don't have that machine. So I wanted the evidence to try to attempt to make fingerprints out of it.
In terms of the casing that was recovered, did you do additional analysis on that?
Yes. So we also have what's called a Recover LFT system. That system essentially is another vacuum system where we place a proprietary sulfur mixture into a chamber. We put the fired cartridge case into the chamber, and the theory behind that is, so your skin has the lipids, but it also has oils and water. But the oils, they begin to etch metal the second that you touch it. And that metal will continue to be etched by that print until that cartridge is fired. So when you load...
If I can interrupt you, is that assuming that there's a good print on the casing?
That's where I was going, yes.
Okay, thank
So when you load a magazine, you're gonna load it with your thumb or your finger, and you're going to enter cartridges into there. And you're going to handle that, cartridge. So your print is going to be on it, and it will continue to etch. And it's etched until fired. So I took the cartridge case, I signed it out from the Miramar Police Department, I put it into there, and that proprietary sulfur that the company, Foster Freeman, who makes the Recover LFT system, they're able to extract the etching of the fingerprint from metal. On this case, a fingerprint was developed. However, it was determined by our lab analysis of the link print unit to be of no value.
And so in terms of the further analysis on that item, did you do anything else?
On the cartridge
On
case?
the cartridge case?
No.
And when you're processing it with the sulfur, does that change the color of the cartridge casing?
It adds a blackening to it.
So I want to go, and we've talked about the injuries to Anthony Williams, so I'm going to go now on to Christopher Thomas. With regards to inside the car, can you discuss the injuries to Christopher Thomas's head and what you observed based on your training and experience?
So Christopher Thomas had an injury to his left cheek. Part of that injury, his face or his cheek, if you will, had the tattooing or the stippling on there, which is indicative of close range fire. Also, part of the wound had an abrasion ring on it, which is also indicative of close round fire.
So I want to, with a demonstrative of the head showing the entrance wound, help in explaining your testimony.
Yes.
So I'm showing counsel what was previously shown to Dr. Sauter and then identifying as EMEO 18-3119. And the marker on here placed by Dr. Sauter.
Again, ladies and gentlemen, the witness is using a demonstrative to assist in explaining or illustrating his testimony. Remember that the evidence is the testimony of the witness. not to just demonstrably exhibit unless it's later received in evidence only. Items of evidence will go back with you to the jury room during your deliberation, so it's not accepted into evidence at a later time. It doesn't go back to the jury room.
So Sergeant Williams, with regards to Christopher Thomas, did that projectile exit his head?
No.
So can you give the same type of opinion as to the orientation of Mr. Thomas's head that you did as to Mr. Williams?
I can give an orientation that he was facing forward.
And how can you say that?
Because the projectile that entered into Christopher Thomas, it's actually about in the middle of his cheek, was completely, it was a full circle. There was no leading edge. There was nothing to indicate that his head was turned to the right, turned to the left. It was straight forward, looking forward. It was the circular pattern that indicates that he was facing forward when that round entered his cheek.
So, Sergeant Williams, you talked about directionality on the car. Does the same thing apply on skin?
Yes.
So you mentioned earlier doing a height and measurements on 2 individuals. What 2 individuals did you measure in this case?
I measured Jamel Demons and Cortland Henry.
You discussed about an angle at 90 degrees. Can you exclude or include someone just based on that particular data?
I'm directly 90
Correct.
with no other measurements.
Yeah. Yes. Can you do that?
No,
Why not?
because you're right at 90, and 90 is that it makes the exact right angle. It makes the perfect square, and it's you get nothing. You're back at 0.
Can a person hold a firearm in a way that is different than 90 degrees?
Yes.
How many different ways have you seen videos during your time in crime scene of people holding firearms?
Many firearms are held in all different ways.
So when you're talking about the shooting reconstruction and ranges, what are the limitations on that particular information that you would give to the jury?
The limitations would be environment, gun, ammunition, any intermediate targets. Those would all be limitations.
Is there anything that requires an individual's arm to be fully straight out before they fire the firearm?
No, you don't have to have an arm fully extended to fire a gun.
And so, Sergeant, with regards to firearms, how long have you carried a firearm?
For almost 20 years.
And are you required to shoot that firearm on a regular basis as part of your employment at the Sheriff's Office?
Yes.
How often?
We shoot about 3 times a year.
And is there anything about the location or positioning of an arm that you take into account on the ability to pull a trigger?
You can pull a trigger with either hand.
So going forward on Chris Thomas inside the car, you said that you can give a distance away based on the measurements inside the car. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that now. How can you determine that that door is closed?
The door, which door?
The rear driver's side passenger door.
That door was closed because I actually applied a chemical called Blue Star to it. Blue Star is attracted to the hemoglobin blood, and it reacted positive, which would be indicative of the door being closed. It actually captured some of the blowback from Anthony Williams and struck that door.
Can you describe to ladies and gentlemen of the jury what types of alternative light sources you used when processing this Jeep?
So I used UV lighting, and the UV lighting is used to locate potential gunshot residue. We're looking at, it really illuminates like the barium and the nitrates and gunshot residue. It's also followed by wearing orange goggles, and it allows me to find potential gunshot residue, and then on top of it, collect the gunshot residue with a special dauber, which is part of a gunshot residue kit, and it's sticky. So I would come by and dab, if you will, the GSR, the gunshot residue that is identified by the UV light and the orange goggles.
So the image that we're looking at here, which is identified as CSW_4814, what are we looking at here?
So this is the back, this is the driver's side back passenger seat compartment area with that door open, with the passenger door in the open position.
And why is it kind of orange?
It's orange because as I'm also wearing orange goggles, so there's an orange tint lens on my camera.
And what are you showing with these particular images?
So I'm showing potential GSR, which is, do we have a different color? That's not good. Here is potential there's one right here, potential GSR, so these are here, all collected with the dauber.
Okay. And those were submitted to RJ Lee for analysis?
Yes.
Going on to this back seat here, what are we looking at in this photo?
This is the driver's side of the vehicle, the back seat, and there's potential GSR on the back seat. There's some right here, and right here. Nope, I'm sorry, that's not GSR. These areas here were GSR that were collected.
And so it's clear for the record that the two that you're circling on the right.
Yes, I'll redo it. Those two right there.
Okay. In terms of this photograph, what are we looking at here?
Do we have a prior?
Is this the back of one of the seats?
Objection, lady.
Sustained.
What are we looking at in this photo?
This, I don't know which seat this is. I think it's the middle seat, but I'm not sure.
Okay, well, I don't want you to guess, so we'll stop on that. Okay, going forward to this photograph, can you orient the ladies and gentlemen of the jury as to what this particular part of the car is?
This is the back seat, and this is the center console that flips down, that has cup holders in it so that you can place drinks.
Okay. And did you see any suspect GSR particles in this area?
Yes, so there's some, there's some right here, and right here that were identified on dab.
Okay. With the orange tint on it, is that some of the things you're talking about, the difficulties of forensic photography?
Yes. So this is actually the top of that center console where it's the storage area for it. So if you wanted to flip it up, it has a place to be. And this is actually some GSR right here. That would be from the ejection port of the firearm. And this is some GSR over here as well. And that was collected on the dauber.
Okay. Now looking at this next photograph, what are we looking at here?
This is the front passenger seat of the rear of it, and it identifies GSR as well. There is some right here, here, and here, which is indicative. There's actually one right here. That's indicative of that intermediate object intercepting the majority of that gunshot residue.
Okay, and in terms of that item, I want to make sure I show you as you identify it for, it's been previously admitted into evidence as state 60. State 60. Okay, so Sergeant, in terms of the item here that's been previously admitted as state 60, is that the dauber that you're talking about?
Yes.
And can you explain exactly how it works and how you collected it?
May I show it to the
Please.
jury?
And if it helps, we can publish it on the large screen here. You just have to step down.
So this is a collection vial. And on this brown part here pulls out, and on the bottom of it is a black sticky item. And I'll explain its purpose besides collecting in a second, but I want to show what that bottom looks like. So when this is sent to a laboratory for gunshot residue analysis, this is actually what's called a SEM, S-E-M. And they put it into a mass spectrometer to determine the gunshot particles that are, the gunshot residue particles that would be there.
And is this the SIM that you use to collect the GSR suspect particles?
Yes.
Okay, so Sergeant, I want to show you what's been previously marked as states GG and shown to defense counsel for identification. So Sergeant, I'm showing you it states GG for identification purposes only. Do you recognize 2 out of those 3 items?
Yes.
How do you recognize those 2 items?
Those are my signatures and my ID on those.
And are those items in the same or substantially same condition as when you collected them?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would now admit states GG into evidence.
No
Any
objection.
objection?
And so.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear. Is there any objection?
No, sir.
It'll be admitted.
States GG will be marked states 80.
Yes, 80. Okay, Sergeant Williams, with regards to the items in this particular packaging, what are the 2 swabs that you collected?
So on the back of the driver's seat of the vehicle, I observed when I applied Blue Star, the chemical that I spoke of that illuminates blood and the hemogroup of blood, I observed what appeared to be a swipe in blood. And a swipe is a blood-bearing surface being transferred to a non-blood-bearing surface. So in this case, a finger or a hand transferring to the back of the seat, which had no blood on it. And I observed this swipe. So I collected with a swab the swipe, and then I used an additional swab to collect the non-blood areas on each side of the swipe.
Okay. So in terms of the location, is there a photo that would help demonstrate where that came from?
I believe there should be one in here.
Excuse me, can we approach? for-
Yes.
Maybe it'd be a good time for lunch.
Sure, sorry.
So Sergeant Williams, we were on the discussion of the DNA swabs that you had collected. Is this a good photo for you to show and demonstrate this blood smear swab as well as the non-blood smear swab?
There was one that was with Blue Star, but I can point in the general area where it was.
Yes, just for
Okay,
this
so the
purposes.
general area of the swipe was here, and
Okay.
then that was a swab, and then I conducted another swab of a non-blood area and a non-blood area.
So Sergeant Williams, I want to ask, did you collect any swabs from the door handle of this Jeep?
I did not.
When were those swabs collected, if you know?
Those were collected by the Miramar Police Department during their initial investigation.
Okay. So council had asked for lunch break. This would be a logical point to stop there.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a short, take a recess for lunch. Remember the admonition, do not discuss the case, don't form any opinion about the case, don't allow anyone to discuss the case in your presence, certainly no research. Just leave your notepads on your chairs, we'll see everybody back at 1:15, all right? Thank you, have a nice lunch. Thank you, let the record reflect the jury stepped out. Counsel remain along with the defendant. Anything to discuss?
No.
All right, see everybody back at 1:15. Thank you, have a nice lunch.